Climate change is a phenomenon that impacts the world. No one, be it a man or a woman or a child, rich or poor, gets spared. However, its effects are disproportionate. On Tuesday, the United Nations Climate Summit held a session on climate change and its impact on women in particular. Listen in.
We know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and we cannot allow equality to be a casualty of climate. But women and girls are also leading efforts to tackle climate change in communities around the world. And in the words of Brianna Ferran, they are not drowning, but fighting. And we must support those efforts. We must enable the full and meaningful participation of women and girls in climate action.
According to the United Nations, 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. It is their role as primary caregivers, as providers of fuel and food, that make them even more vulnerable when flooding or drought comes into the picture. Women activists and rights advocates from across the world gathered in Glasgow on Tuesday, and among them was a young Somalian girl who made an emotional appeal. She called on delegates at COP26 to plant the seeds for a better future for women and girls.
Or the protection that they need.
I hope you can all stand with us and commit to being planters of real seeds today that may turn into flowers tomorrow. I will hand these seeds out when our ministers are ready, but I hope that within these negotiations, that within these rooms, you may be able to plant them, and then once we leave COP, we may all tend to them so that they grow into a beautiful world that is deserving of girls like Amal and deserving to have all girls be safe within it. Thank you very much.
The puppet of a 10-year-old Syrian refugee, Amal, was also present in Glasgow after walking thousands of miles across Europe. Little Amal reached the Glasgow COP26 talks to raise awareness of the plight of refugee children who are at the front line of climate change and its impact.
When we think about the climate movement, often the voice of the climate refugee isn't so clearly heard. It's not as sexy, it's not discussed on at the kind of like negotiating table, and it was really important for us on Gender Day that the voice of the young female refugee was heard, and so she's in a way a spokesperson for those that don't have a voice, for the children who don't have a voice in this grand negotiating table.
Among the other notable attendees were US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democratic lawmaker Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Pelosi had previously expressed strong commitment by the US Congress in addressing the climate crisis. This is not the first time when the key concern was brought to light. Earlier in the 2015 Paris meet, a special provision was made for the empowerment of women, recognizing that they are disproportionately impacted. Earlier this year, our executive editor Palki Sharma Upadhyay discussed the impact of climate change on women with the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson. Listen in.
You previously said that climate change is not, and I'm quoting you, is not gender neutral and women bear the brunt of its effects. Can you explain to our viewers how the impact of climate change is different for men and women?
There's a very real gender dimension to climate injustice, if I could put it that way, because women have different social roles in many countries. Sometimes they have different rights. They may not have land rights. They are much less likely to have access to capital, access even to training in agriculture. And, you know, I'm more familiar with the African continent and African countries than I am with Asia. But, you know, so many women are smallholder farmers, about 80% of those in Africa, yet they don't have access to capital. Often they don't have land rights, they don't have training, and yet they have to go further in drought for water, further for firewood, etc. So, and yet women are the ones who are trying to help their communities to become resilient. I wrote a book on climate justice, a book of stories, and of those 11 stories in the book, 9 of them are about what women are doing to fight back and help their communities, even though they are disproportionately affected. So it's a two-way. They're not just victims, they're also actors for change.
In the area of sustainable development, you have urged women to be at the forefront of decision-making. Have you seen any progress in this direction? Are more women taking those leadership roles?
Well, you know, it's interesting to look at the example of COVID. Women-led countries have done, proportionately far better than men-led countries in relation to COVID. I mean, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand is the poster child, if you like. She took tough decisions. She listened to the science. She brought her people with her, and New Zealand has done very well. But, the president of Taiwan, close to China, has done well. In Europe, the women leaders, Angela Merkel in Germany, yes, there was a resurge, but she understood the science and, has coped pretty well. And the prime ministers of Norway, of Denmark, of Iceland, all of these have done better than their male counterparts in the UK or in France or, so... And then you look at countries like Brazil, you look at what President Trump was doing, the ego of some of those men who didn't listen to the science, who didn't care about the health of their population as they should have.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.